Hardspace Shipbreaker is a game where you dismantle ships in space. Hired under the corporate giant the Lynx Corporation, you must work hard to repay your debt while facing some negatives that would naturally come from working for a giant corporation with an extremely dangerous job. Hardspace Shipbreaker kind of just falls short, while also being enjoyable from the gameplay perspective. I honestly don't know exactly how to feel about the game except let down. There's so many things that factor against my enjoyment and perception of the game. I don't enjoy the game as a whole because of the lackluster sum of its parts. Hardspace Shipbreaker is probably the game with the closest feeling of missed potential that I have played in a long time. The gameplay is fine on its own, but the story and universe drags the game down in my opinion. There's a lot going on in the narrative that's just plain old counterintuitive. And before I start explaining myself, I need to clarify exactly what the gameplay formula of Hardspace Shipbreaker is. The game at its core is a job simulator game. Yes, it's a futuristic job. No, it's not like Farming Sim, but it's more akin to Power Washing Simulator. Job simulator games that fit in the same branch as Power Washing Sim are fun because of their simple and relaxing gameplay formula. Hardspace isn't necessarily simple or relaxing in concept, but the gameplay has a flow to it that enables tunnel visioning, which is a common sentiment found in relaxing job sim games. Plus, once you get the hang of shipbreaking, the game comes a lot more naturally. The feel of the game does not match up with the story and mood set by the characters. A vast majority of the dialogue in Hardspace is about the company not caring about its workers and its workers wanting to start a union. Being constantly reminded that you have debt in the game and that the work is dangerous is honestly something that detracted from my enjoyment. Usually, if someone is talking negatively about something, it starts a negative mindset for all parties. If the majority of dialogue is negative about gameplay in some way, that will make the gameplay feel a lot more like work. Funny, right? The job simulator gameplay feels like a job. Sure, it's an enjoyable job, but if someone is constantly talking about the negatives of your job, content you're watching, or even a game you're playing, it's likely to have some effect on your experience. It's like if you were to play Slime Rancher, and if you had a character constantly reminding you that you have to pay your taxes on a farm, or the game constantly berating you to watch the stock market to sell for optimal value. It would be like if Stardew Valley reminded you every morning before you could even leave your house that Joja could take over at any time and ruin your farm. It's just extra stress in a game where the gameplay formula shouldn't throw in extra stress. I frequently thought to myself while playing the game, just let me do my work, I don't care, and stop talking. Obviously, that's not a good mindset to have in a real job. That may potentially backfire and you could have a worse experience at work in the long run. But Hardspace is a game, and not wanting people to constantly talk about actual work issues shouldn't be a problem in a video game. The only real plot point for the story is that management doesn't care about the workers and wants to prevent unions from emerging. It's not nuanced, it's not interesting, and it doesn't seem to account for the player's enjoyment. Now, I feel like I do need to clarify something. Having a message and intent in whatever form of media is completely fine. It enables discourse, allows creators to speak their mind, and can deepen someone's experience beyond just a surface level. However, execution is everything. And the way Hardspace executes its message ends up detracting from the experience. The game doesn't do well in presenting a message just because it screams it at you. Clarifying once more, I'm not against Hardspace Shipbreaker's message, just its execution. My experience with the game was consistently affected by the message, which I, to a decent extent, even agree with. Its presentation simply did not jive with me. Well, we started with the bad. What about this game is good, and why did I actually stick with it instead of just forgetting about it? It's a fun game, I'm not gonna lie. As I mentioned earlier, its gameplay warrants tunnel visioning, and it's one of those job simulator games that can easily lock in your attention whenever you play it. Flying around in space is fun in pretty much any game that has decent controls. The grapple is fun, of course it's going to be, it's a grapple, and you're in space. Once you upgrade your brakes and thrusters, you can easily fly around ships for fun or efficiency, getting from one place to another in seconds. Cutting cut points of a ship is simple, rewarding, and satisfying when you get the nice pop from the parts coming loose and sometimes from air pressure. What I really liked about the game was its tutorial progression. The game starts off with a simple tutorial, but over time it quickly introduces new features to you. The tutorial sections that come with new features get shorter and more rushed as the game progresses. When some elements are introduced, you might not know exactly what to do because the game didn't fully explain itself. This trend continues on and continues to get worse until the game has nothing left to teach you. This design choice makes sense with the narrative, and I at least have to give it some credit. The reason this ties in with the narrative is that your middle manager just wants your stuff to get done and doesn't want you to waste time, even if that is time learning. I mean, it's realistic. Some managers would rather manage and tell you to get your work done than teach and lead you to work better. We've all probably been managed like that before. Point aside, it's a cool system that incorporates the narrative without being overbearing. Plus, in my opinion, it at least enhances the experience by having a more unique and nuanced learning curve, even if it's not super hands-on. As you get into more advanced ships, you have more opportunities to straight up die from one small mistake. After learning the basics, you are taught about maintaining pressurization before cutting into sections of ships. You are taught not to cut fuel tanks, and you're taught how to safely get reactors. Eventually, you'll have to worry about environmental cooling units, higher class reactors, fuel tanks, and pressurization all at the same time. Each ship can turn into a mini puzzle, and the experience is rewarding, assuming you don't blow everything up, getting a little tilted in the process. I know I've been there. The game is relaxing, aside from the threat of being completely obliterated by your mistakes. I promise it really isn't that stressful. Hey, sometimes you aren't expecting to blow up, and you do, or hey, maybe you are expecting to blow up and risking it all. It's always a coin flip. Sometimes the ship's layout and pressurization can get weird and risky, where the ship may seem impossible to dismantle safely. I've been there. It's still an enjoyable process in my experience to try and solve the ship. If you ever get into playing the game, I should let you know that tethers are your friends, and you should not worry about using too much of them or running out, because buying more is cheap, and tethers are so rewarding. When you have ships dismantled and loose parts floating about, you can quickly clear these up using your grapple's push feature, which can be used for non-work purposes itself, but I didn't tell you that. And your tethers. Chaining a ton of debris together to go into any of the bins all at once is extremely satisfying. Oh, also tethers are definitely needed for some larger ship parts, which can be annoying even with tethers. The last thing I can think of in relation to gameplay are ghost ships. Yeah, I know there's blast charges, but they are too forgettable to even mention. But hey, they can be satisfying when used in bulk. But where was I? Ghost ships, right. Well, ghost ships come late into the game when the narrative has pretty much served its purpose. Ghost ships are interesting little buggers that are somewhat spooky. A ghost ship works like any other ship, but has some nodes inside. These are AI nodes, and they control the ship in a haunting-esque manner. They can open and close airlocks, switch air pressure, and just do a bunch of other things that can mess with your workflow. When AI nodes are active on ghost ships, there's no music, communication is garbled and muffled, and the general feel is off. Ghost ships will also come with helmets that can be picked up for lore occasionally. Ghost ships are cool, but are not really part of the narrative and are completely optional. So much so that I almost forgot about them when making the script for this video. I'm gonna be honest, ghost ships are probably one of the best of many examples of missed potential in Hardspace. The game treats one of its few interesting sci-fi things like a red-headed stepchild. What am I saying? It treats all of its sci-fi stuff poorly. Anyway, ghost ships only really appear late in the story, when everything is basically already done. They feel so cut off from the game and are treated as a secondary mechanic. As far as I know, the only time there's any dialogue mention of ghost ships is when you're introduced to them. They feel like they're a second thought in game design. Ghost ships are optional content, but they're too optional in my opinion, if that even makes any sense. They're the only type of special ship that you can run into, and with the way ship select works, you'd have to outright select a ghost ship and choose to dismantle it. The inherent problem with this is that ghost ships usually have less value, don't show you a preview, and are a little more tedious to get through. Ghost ships are a nice change of pace, but honestly could have been executed a bit better. But I also found myself getting bored of this somewhat lacking ship variety in the game overall. I wish ghost ships didn't feel like side content, or more incentivized, didn't feel tedious, and were also maybe incorporated into the world a little bit better. Ghost ships feel like a second thought when they're one of the two relatively interesting sci-fi things in this game's entirety. Let's talk about the mostly missed potential of cloning. Extremely early on in Hardspace, you are introduced to a logical explanation of the respawn system, the Everwork program. Before you even enter space to do the tutorial, you sign a contract and go through a cloning process that destroys your original body. Dying on the job will generate a clone for you and send them out to continue what you started while adding to your debt. That's about 70% of what cloning adds to the world building and story of the game. The other 30% is cool, but still leaves a large margin for improvement. There are 3 things that are done with the Everwork program that are executed well, but didn't have enough presence in the story, at least in my opinion. First off, your mentor, Weaver, says that he can't work anymore due to a cloning failure, which likely won't happen to anyone because of the odds being small. This is addressed one more time in the story, and that's it. This could have been an interesting mechanic, like something from Rogue Legacy, where there's a chance that a clone would have a different playstyle due to an abnormality or something like that. I know it would take extra development time, but it would still be cool and build off of the world building established early on in the game. The second fairly interesting thing that they did with cloning comes super late into the story of the game. It actually takes place in the final mission before the endgame, right at the end of Act 3. Spoilers if you care, but when you're doing the industrial action mission, everyone is destroying ships instead of salvaging them. The middle manager tells one of your coworkers, Kaido, that he will keep cloning him until he's basically a blob with sentience. This is the only time the negatives of cloning are ever brought up after Weaver's intro. Anyway, Kaido's cloning data is deleted in this mission, as he's about to fly into a furnace and is all but confirmed dead. Thankfully, Kaido doesn't die and his cloning data is recovered later, but that's it. Deleting someone's cloning data right before they may have died is the second interesting bit that they actually did with cloning in this game. Last thing is a little more predictable, but hey, I gotta give some credit to the game's writing. When you finish the endgame, you repay your debt and go back home. You get to view the credits and say goodbye to the game as your character goes home to live their life. But wait, the game ends with the clone being created, basically saying, big corporation is bad, and if they want, they can essentially make you work forever via clones. It's a cool existential dread thing, but at the same time, it's at the end of the game, and at least in my opinion, is not a good enough payoff. Plus, it's more or less a thing that's usually brought up in sci-fi when something has to do with clones. With the lackluster story, characters, and motivations, I was hoping for more interesting world building as the story went on, but there was rarely anything about clones or AI ghost ships. Trying to find anything noteworthy outside just the gameplay was hard for me to do, and I really tried to like the non-gameplay parts of the game, but it all fell too short. As many reviews on Steam say, the game focused on a mid-story rather than actually focusing on more gameplay elements and ship variety. The game was alright, but it simply wasn't really for me. I still have a few things to talk about that bothered me with gameplay, and I didn't really know where to put them in my script, so they're just gonna go here. A lot of these things are minor, counterintuitive things with game design itself, and are mostly just nitpicks, but they still are things that impacted my experience in some way. First off, unless if you're playing on the easiest difficulty, there's a 15-minute shift timer. Half of me likes this and understands why it might be in the game, but the other half views it only as a hindrance. The shift timer can make some situations more tense sometimes, but is mostly just an annoyance that makes you quit ships early, or just wastes an extra shift. It's nice to have several opportunities to take a break mid-ship, but it's not nice to be forced to take a break. When I played through the game, I always tried to get as much value out of each ship as possible, only to discover that I probably used up extra shifts not needing to. It might be more efficient to cut corners instead of perfectly extracting a ship. You aren't even punished much for cutting corners as, spoiler alert, money doesn't really feel like an issue when you hit endgame. I can see the appeal of having the choice to cut corners on ships, but there's not enough nuance in the decision for it to be too noteworthy. You never need to rush the ship and you never need to do a poor job with the ship, so there's not really ever a need to cut corners unless you really want to hit a milestone before the shift ends. The game has 3 acts and an endgame phase. Acts 1 and 2 are passed through simply progressing through the story and earning rank from salvaging. Act 3 is passed after beating a certain mission mentioned earlier called Industrial Action. Once Act 3 is complete, you get a cutscene basically saying the Union pretty much did nothing except get the middle manager demoted, which is cool I guess, but it's oh so anticlimactic. After Act 3, your debt is reduced pretty much in its entirety, making all money earned earlier pretty much pointless. During the endgame, you need to gather supplies to upgrade a hand-me-down ship before you can end the game for good. I ended up just wanting to get it over with, so I selected a ship, grabbed parts that I needed from it, and got a new ship. I repeated this until I was able to leave and left as soon as possible. At least I got a cool cutscene for my work, but man, the endgame could have either not existed or just have had a better execution. The gameplay is too intertwined with the narrative, and while that's already a problem for me considering the quality of the story, there's also another concern. The gameplay is structured in a way where it seems like it should be consumed at whatever interval the player wants. It feels like the player should be able to hop on and play whenever they want to, whether it be over the course of a month or throughout several years. However, the existence and structure of the narrative feels like it encourages the player to play the game within a short range of time, or at least short enough to remember all of the characters and where the plot is. Sure, the plot isn't complex, and you don't even really need to pay attention to it, but the game still feels like it's directing the player to keep coming back without leaving for too long and forgetting story beats. The game focuses too hard on a story, and that just feels counterintuitive when you're looking to other job simulator games that fit on the more relaxing end of the spectrum. Games like Power Washing Sim, Farming Sim, Slime Rancher, Core Keeper, and to an extent, Stardew Valley can all be left and returned to a year later without the return feeling jarring. Having a story in Hardspace Shipbreaker ruins the experience and just makes the game feel a little more counterintuitive. There's a split focus on gameplay and story, which doesn't happen to an extent this large in other similar games. A lot to do with the narrative of the game feels like it was put in at the last second to avoid working more on the gameplay side and developing more ships. A lot of reviewers who even played the game during its earlier builds even said this. The narrative could have been so much better if it spent a little more time in the oven, or the game could have been better with a stronger gameplay focus and less story. When I was finishing off the game, I truly just wanted to be done with it. Not because of the gameplay being bad, but because of how I was tired of it and how I felt I couldn't quit while being so close to finishing. Plus, I'm also trying to take games off of my backlog and finish them and not add more games to the list of the many I need to play. Without a story, I would have been able to come back to the game after a long break without any fear of missing out or losing context. In my opinion, the game would have been better off if it were more of a game that you could just hop on, salvage a ship, and come back a month later. But it's not. There is a free play mode where you can select which ship type to salvage, and a weekly race mode, but both of these feel like an afterthought and lack any progression that the base game otherwise had. I hope these rants helped you understand why I think Hardspace missed the mark, and kind of failed in my eyes. I enjoyed the game, I will admit. It just had a lot of things that took away from my experience. There was a ton of things that were counterintuitive, like the pacing of the game, the negativity toward the job itself in the narrative, and even the scale and importance of the narrative. Instead of finishing the game out of excitement, I finished it out of impatience. I just wanted to be done with the game, and well, here we are, I'm done with the game. So, would I recommend the game? Let me just answer that question extremely late into the video when I've probably already answered that for some of you already. I would not outright recommend the game for the sum of its parts at its full price of $35. According to SteamDB, the game has hit the period where it gets a 50% discount when on sale. I could recommend this game at this price as long as the player lowers their expectations or can overlook the narrative and pacing issues with the game. It feels like a game that could benefit from that despite the narrative's execution. Hardspace Shipbreaker offers a pretty unique gameplay formula that at least I haven't seen before in games. The gameplay's fun, but it feels like it's missing its true potential. I had a fun time playing the game. The experience was enjoyable and unique, but the negatives really outweigh the positives, as I keep on saying. The fact that there was no real gameplay progression other than new ship designs and some gear upgrade paths really took away from the potential of the game. In my opinion, the game would be better if there was a career mode without a narrative. The pacing would feel a lot more intuitive with the gameplay, allowing players to leave the game for a while and not have to worry about missing story beats. There's no way to play the game if you want to progress your gear while avoiding the narrative. The two other game modes feel like a second thought and fail to really stand out. I've talked about this game enough and how it really just missed the mark for me. I wish I enjoyed the game more, but I couldn't because of the lackluster sum of its parts. I hope more games come out like this in the gameplay department so there's more competition. The only real reason I'd recommend this game is for the gameplay alone. But as I have said way too many times in the video, Hardspace Shipbreaker just falls short and its gameplay can't carry it. I hope you guys liked the video, or found it helpful in some way despite it being fairly negative. At first, I didn't want to make a video on this game, but the more I thought about it, the more I cared. I honestly wanted to like the game when I bought it. I mean, isn't that the point of buying games? Anyway, if you made it this far, I appreciate you for sticking it through to the end and potentially doing anything that can help this video or the channel grow. Liking the video, subscribing, commenting, all of this helps out a ton and can let me know that I'm doing well or how I can do better. Until next time, later days.